We're now ready to start the reassembly of the library. The first thing we're going to put back in is the fan motors. Simply just put it inside the library, line it up with the holes that put it in, insert your screw and line up the mounting bracket for the first one. And once you get the first one in, the rest will all go pretty easy. You don't need to overly tighten these, just tighten them up so they're snug. Once you have the fan remounted, go ahead and reinsert your air filter, making sure that the airflow arrows are pointed towards the inside of the library. Remember, that is key. These go in with an airflow directional arrows pointing in towards the library. Then take the mounting assembly, mount it back, put it up, quarter turn clockwise, and your fan is totally reinstalled with its filter. We're now going to install the drive bay power distribution panel. Insert it into the library. Remember, this requires 5 screws with the nuts that go on the back. I always start about the second connection in, line it up, once you get the first one started, leave it and then do the remaining. Once you get the last screw properly fastened, then make sure you reattach your cable. This cable goes from the executive board to the drive bay power distribution board. Normally this would be hanging inside because you'd have the library together still, but this time it's right now happens to be disassembled. So all you do is make sure you run it into the library, down, and connect it to the connection at the top. It just snaps in place. And if you put it in, you will hear it snap. And this runs on up and gets ready to connect to the executive board when we put the executive board back in. Next, we're going to look at putting in the power supply. By putting in the power supply, we have to make sure it's the tape drive power supply. Remember what I said earlier, that this is very important. You put the right power supply in the right position. Bring the cables out. Push everything back in together. I would first put the screws in to hold it in place. Next, make sure you install your cable connections, making sure they snap in place completely. Then you'll put your screen on. You've now installed the tape drive power supply. Next, we're going to go ahead and install the front LCD panel. Once again, the key to remember here is that you have your standoffs in place so that you don't split or crack the board. The first thing I would do is I would reconnect your cable, insert it into the connection, snap it down, then mount it onto its braces. And then put your bolts on. Once you have all your bolts back on, If you want, you can reattach the cables with tie ties to the back of this so it stays out of the way for sure as the handler goes up and down. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to install the tape drives. Remember, you have your SCSI cable connection, your NORI connection, your SCSI ID connection, and your power connection. These are, if you notice, there's a blue wire right here. That is a color-coded wire to make sure you properly connect this. The blue always goes towards the power side. The same thing applies to your SCSI cable connector. And if you'll notice, the SCSI cable connector is all the way over as close as possible to the power connection. You should have two sets of pins open. This needs to be all the way over to the side. All you would do is put it in through the front, slide it in, and counter turn the screws again. Once again with the second drive. Sometimes if they're a little hard to do, you can take a small screwdriver flathead and use that. Just push in and turn, and it's properly put in. Then once again you would have to go to the back of the library, make sure you plug in the power connection and the NORI connection. Now you have to remember this serial connection can be put on three ways. Only one of them is correct. It is keyed. Well, you'll notice that if you can't, I don't think you can see this, but the uppermost corner one here is blocked. And if you look on the board here, you will see that there is missing a pin at this corner right here. That means that that blocked pin needs to line up right here. You can go too high and you can offset to one side. So there's only one way you should be connected, and that is properly like that. The next thing is to connect your SCSI cable connection. This goes to drive 2. This one goes to drive 1. Now the reason I was able to connect these so simply this way is because I happen to have the executive board out. The biggest thing you need to keep in mind is when this is all connected up and you have the executive board installed, is that you want to be careful of this connection here that is on the top to connect it to your executive board. Because if you try to pull this out with this connected, you don't have any give here, and you will have a tendency to separate the cable here or down here on the back of the plane. For doing the reinstalling the carousel, we need to make sure we bring the wire up from the stepper motor in through the little hole to the side here. We then need to make sure we install the 4 little hex screws to hold it in place. Remember, they don't need to be overly tight, they just need to be snug. This is the carousel power distribution board. This is the sensor that the carousel rides through, so it senses its positioning on the system. When you put it in, make sure that you align the power board with this little guidepost right here. This is essential to ensure that it's installed properly and lines up properly. You then have 3 screws to put in. You then have 2 connections to make. One is the motor connection that slides and plugs right in onto the back of the board. The other one is the power connection that connects back to the executive board for carousel operations.